Okay, so it's morning on a lightly drizzly Venice day, and I'm with Evan this morning. And Evan and I have known each other for now, what, 2 or 3 years, Evans?
I think it's been about it'll be 2 years this summer, so
Yeah.
about 18 months plus. Yeah.
I think we met at a men's retreat in Ojai, if I remember right, the first time.
We met
Hmm.
at Mount Olive Lutheran Church at 6 p.m.
Oh,
on
right.
a Thursday evening.
That's right. In your first
I
30
just
days.
yeah, I think I was that sobriety date was June 22nd, and I think that was the first week of July. So I think it was just in the first few weeks. Yeah.
So you've gone through a period of sobriety. You went out for a period. You've gone through rehab. You're out of rehab. You're looking at things, I would say, with new eyes, which we always are, to the degree that we begin to concede the fact that the moment's always new and it's always available and we're always in it.
Yeah.
And you called
I
this
would.
morning with an issue.
Yeah, I wanted to. I'm just kind of thinking through my life. I mean, my experience of from around the time I met you has been like this concept of honesty, both outward and inward, has been a journey, and it's kind of like peeling back layers of an onion.
Right.
Every time I think I'm being completely honest and open, I find out later that that there are more layers. Yeah, so it's a journey in itself, and yeah, and one of the things I've been trying to be honest with myself about lately is my career in the practice setting with which I do my job, and thinking about not a career change, but what balance and sobriety, and sort of trying to make my life work, you know.
So you're post rehab, clear headed, and beginning to consider things that you may not have been considering when either you were thickly engulfed in the obsessive thinking that got you back to drinking,
Yeah,
right?
I would say that you know not thinking clearly and that obsessive thinking that got me back to drinking. I'm not experiencing that today, but yeah, clear-headed is I've learned is relative. I mean, because I thought I was clear-headed. There's been times I thought I was clear-headed, and it turns
When
out later
when you
I
weren't.
was still lying to myself. Yeah.
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 Well, and that kind of makes the point that the ability we have to think about our thinking includes the ability to think we're not thinking what we're thinking and not doing what we're doing, and then presume that nothing that's happening should be happening. And thinking of it as everything else that's wrong rather than the thinking we're doing about our thinking that's wrong.
Yeah.
You get that?
I get most of it, Jack. I get some of it.
Okay.
I think that, to me, you know, what I know very clearly is that I can get lost. Like for instance, when I drank, when I went out, I was lost in thinking that I felt that I wasn't aware I was lost in. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we can do that, I mean, if the first step is talking about admitting that we were powerless over alcohol, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then it's telling us that we thought we had power over alcohol.
Yeah.
And if I thought I had power over alcohol, it was really the power over the thought I had that was not true as being true
Yeah.
that seemed to empower me and have me embark on a crusade of impossibility to prove that drinking would solve my problem.
Yeah. Crusade of Impossibility. I like that. That could be like the title of a memoir for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the idea of doing something impossible is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that everything that we think of as impossible is actually impossible. But when we're thinking about things, when we're thinking about a lie, we're thinking about something that isn't true being true or something that is true not being true.
Yeah.
And that's all a construct of thought. That's a choice we make, right?
Yeah.
And then what did you say? I feel lost. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
lost because there's nothing to be found in that, literally. the foundation of that is bankrupt. It's empty. There's no foundation whatsoever.
Yeah.
So that feeling of isolation, loneliness, the idea of being disconnected, depressed, having no other alternative, life's impossible, all begins to aim at life rather than our choice and our experience and the sort of intoxication we have with the thinking we're doing. And that's
Yeah.
the obsession of the mind. The book says clearly the disease centers in the mind. And for humans, the mind is the brain.
Yeah.
As beings, the mind is the mind. It's the mind we share. It's the indivisibility of reality and truth and absolute nature.
Yeah.
It's not the reality of things relatively. It's the reality of absolute nothingness and sort of in sense of this absolute seeming void, and yet it's filled with information. What would that information be but all knowing? Exactly what the book says. All powerful, all knowing, omnipotent, infinite, absolute, unlimited.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
my experience is we struggle with relativity and the subjectivity and objectivity. And you're kind of
Yeah.
describing that, thinking I can have a thought that isn't true and not even think I'm having that thought.
Yeah.
And my sense is that that experience you have that's really conflicted, that has you feel lost, all those things are telling you in body language, all that terminology is saying the thought you're thinking has no basis. It is not only lost, it can't be found because it has no basis in reality. That's what delusion and insanity is in this induced state.
Yeah. I mean, my instinct is that's why conscious contact with the higher power is the only sort of, the only thing that can, the only, the only thing that can pull me out of that in that moment.
Well,
Okay.
and ultimately, it's saying that you're not pulled into it other than the thinking you're doing that gives you this sort of narrative that gives you the idea that you're in quicksand and that it's deep and that it's fraught with peril and all that kind of stuff. And it begins to develop a story of impossibility that isn't true. It's
Yeah.
just developing. The longer I hold on to thoughts of that sort, the longer I begin to develop a story to justify the insanity of it. But I don't think it's insane. I think it's the only thing I can do. I think it's really my sanity. But that's the whole point of insanity is that nobody who's insane says I'm insane because to say that would be sane
Right. Right. So it's not pulling you out of it. It's just reminding you that you're not,
in it.
that the reality is you're not stuck in it.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah.
that if the 11th step sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact is read accurately, Bill's saying we're improving an existing contact. We're not getting a contact. We're not getting a God. We're not getting a spirit. We're not ending up in some place we've never been. We're starting to admit that the human consciousness, the brain, the thinking is beginning to align with reality and think in terms of reality, not in terms of a God that's named any specific way other than the way we choose, because we have the freedom to choose that power as anything literally beyond the limits of our subjective thinking is what we're being. In the first step, we're looking at absolute subjectivity in terms of our thinking. I can
Mm-hmm.
control my drinking, so all I'm going to do is continue. What I did was drank out of control and used drugs out of control for years to prove I had control.
Mm-hmm.
Could never do
Yeah.
that. It was an impossibility. So what did my life seem like? Impossible. What did I do? Create manifested experiences that were deficient, scarce, defective, inability to make money, inability to have relationships. All the bedevilments became my experience. If I
Yeah.
begin to read the language of my experience and listen to the words and apply them to my thinking rather than who I think I am, because when I think my thoughts are real, I think I become my thoughts. When in fact, if thoughts are something I'm doing, I can't be them, but I can have them. Very different
Right.
experience. And I know you've
Right.
listened to enough of the conversations to sort of, you've been in the middle of this for a little bit.
Yeah, I have. I've been thinking a lot about that and the mental obsession. The mental obsession is really with me, and I've been sleeping lately, Jack. I've
Good.
been dreaming and I've been praying. It's funny like I feel sometimes when I'm awake, I feel silly, you know, praying and asking for the mental obsession to be lifted because I don't always feel like it's on me, or I'm not always aware of it being so on me. But I'll wake up from a dream and be praying before I'm fully awake.
Right.
God, please remove this obsession to drink. Yeah.
So think of that transition from the first step of being completely subjective and literally believing that the world is the limited world of my thoughts. And there is nothing
Hmm.
beyond them. Anything beyond them would be a threat to them. Anything. So I
Hmm.
don't even consider there's anything on them. So I'm intoxicated with these ideas and literally setting off chemicals in my body that I become addicted to. An overuse
Yeah.
of adrenaline, an overuse of serotonin, dopamine, all these kind of things that are there for my well being all of a sudden get used up for an imagined emergency that I've actually created, I've actually
Yeah.
imposed, I've actually induced. Second step, what does it say? If I think my thoughts are real and I think I become my thoughts as a result, what does the second step say? Came to believe in a power greater than ourselves. What's that mean?
Hmm.
Greater than the subjectivity of my potential to think. Name it anything.
Yeah.
Think of it in any way. You're beginning to think beyond the edges of these thoughts. This limited universe that I've been thinking was mine and only mine, and I had to protect, and I had to live in, and fraught in fear to protect against anyone ever thinking
Yeah.
of anything else. All of a sudden, I see that there's something beyond there. And prayer is actually speaking rather than talking to myself or about myself. I'm starting to see that there is more to consider than that self. Why? Because I'm realizing that's just the limits of my thoughts. It's not who I am, it's the limit of my thoughts. And I begin to function on an objective level. That means if there's any hope of anything greater than my thinking, I want to begin to communicate with that. I want to begin to talk in terms of that, with that, rather than speak about my thinking, about my thinking, about my thinking, about my thinking all the time.
So we go from a place of the world is my thoughts to, I mean, and then we believe, that power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, and then we make a decision. What is the world? What is the world? What what's the transformation that happens?
Well,
We go from
clearly,
the
clearly the world is no longer limited to the bubble of my thought, and now everything beyond my thoughts becomes possible. When the mariners of old thought that the horizon was the edge of a flat world, they thought that would predict doom and failure and gloom and misery. So stay away at all costs. Think
yeah,
about that in relation to a thought. If I think my universe is only what I think as I get close to the edge of it, that I'm going to fall out of it. But on a sphere, you can never reach the horizon. No matter how fast you go, no matter how far you go, what it keeps doing is moving. Every inch we move toward it, it moves away. So it's actually
yeah,
impossible. So the impossibility wasn't the doom and gloom of a world that was unseen. It was the doom and gloom of looking beyond the thoughts that seemed unseen of the people
yeah,
looking. That was the doom they were experiencing. And if this concept that we talk about in the mental obsession meeting is correct, that doom and gloom was clear to them because they knew better than to think that their thoughts were the sum total of existence and all that there was. They had a sense of something greater.
yeah,
So if we have that sense, if we have that awareness and we're dumbing it down constantly by trying to feel better about what's wrong and trying to get over what's wrong, we're not taking advantage of what's wrong as an educational course to say, oh, I'm thinking something that's wrong. That's why I feel wrong. I'm thinking that something, if it's wrong, it must be bad. I feel bad.
yeah,
Start to assign the feelings to the thinking we're doing, and all of a sudden you begin to realize whatever's beyond my thinking is the beginning of everything. And it was never the end. My thinking was never the end of anything at all. And now the subjectivity becomes objectivity, and the two combined becomes a clear vision of a relative experience, a human experience within a relative world that may well be, or a relative universe that may well be infinite. And the universe doesn't have to be infinite on its own for infinity to exist, regardless of how it's defined.
Yeah.
So our
It just
universe may
is.
be one of an infinite number of universes simultaneously occurring. Who knows? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What we can be sure of is that it is what it is. And it
Right.
certainly isn't what I limit it as in any way, ever. I can think it is. I have that freedom. And I can then
Yeah.
suffer the consequences of the learning curve that starts to happen because I'm I'm taking that flat world, and the learning curve is starting to bend me in a direction of beginning to notice that it's all spherical. Everything in the universe is rotating in some way. The Earth rotates, the orbits rotate, the galaxies rotate. Everything is moving in this circular fashion.
I like that. I like that imagery of the moving over the ocean on a sphere, and but in the moment thinking you're on a plane. The I my pattern of drinking and using was first to escape my thoughts, and but then it became compulsive to just sort of not subvert or not experience the thoughts in the first place. You know what I mean?
Mhm. That's the
Um,
that's the desensitization. That's the ignorance. Ignoring equals ignorance. Obviously, that's not intelligible or intelligent for an intelligent species.
right.
It would be the beginning of a stupefaction and a dumbing down of our capacity as a species to function on that basis and think that it's the only thing we can do. And we have done a spectacularly excellent job of doing just that, making believe we have nothing to do with it. And you know what that is? A suicidal thought.
It's suicide, whether it's slow or fast. It's all suicide.
Yeah, we're
Even
thinking
smoking
we don't
cigarettes
exist.
is.
We're
Yeah.
almost hoping not to exist to be able to avoid the culpability for the actions we're taking. We're seeing them
It's
as so
so
dreadful and so not us that we're hoping not to exist to finally come to terms with them rather than simply admit we're creating them, we're manifesting them, we're choosing them freely.
it's so weird that nature put us in this position where, well, just like the evolution could happen in a way that at least a certain subset of people, of which I'm one, like has an impulse for suicide, because it's the exact opposite of what I see in the natural world. It's the
Of
opposite of my
instinct.
dog, for instance. My dog wants to survive at all costs. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So,
Yes.
so,
Well, and what's
so what?
interesting is the instincts gone awry in the big book is actually when we make believe that reality is truth, we now create an enemy that seems to be stuck in our head that goes with us everywhere we go. And so you were talking about escaping your thoughts. Think about that concept. Your thoughts are in
Yeah.
your head. You're
Hmm.
moving your body around to escape from the thoughts you're having that go with you wherever you go. It's an impossibility. And then life
Yeah.
seems impossible because of that choice.
Yeah.
And if you think of evolution, my sense is this is simply if love is love and is absolutely absolute freedom, we
Hmm.
absolutely have the freedom to do this, just like humans thought that there was no other way to survive than not have fire. When they
Hmm.
discovered they were witnessing fire through lightning strikes and all kinds of other ways, and when they finally captured it, they didn't know how to turn it on. They didn't know how to do it themselves. They figured it out. It took time. So if
Yeah.
we can be incapacitated by ideas that make believe things are true that aren't true, we're actually missing the opportunity of nature telling us what it is we're doing and what we have and how we have it and how it is rather than what we think about it. So that if there's a diversion there, if there's a perversion there, those would be examples of being off course rather than being guided, allowing them to guide us back and adjust accordingly our thinking. We become, we act like we don't know. We say it a
Yeah.
lot. Well, I just don't know any better. Well, we actually do know better because we wouldn't feel worse if we didn't know better. Worse would not be a
Yeah.
consequence of better and worse are the same thing. Good and bad are the same thing. They're both just different ends of the seesaw, the teeter totter.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
speaking in those terms starts to be illuminating even in our own process of thought because you can kind of catch your seeming self
Hmm.
talking to a seeming self as though that seeming self is real and wonder why you're struggling with it.
Yeah.
Start to say, oh, wow, I have this conversation going on and I can think about my thinking. That's the point of contemplative thinking. But it's thinking, it's not me. It's something I am choosing to do. If I'm doing it poorly, I'm going to feel poor, and I'm going to feel worthless, and I'm going to feel valueless, and I'm going to feel low self-esteem, and I'm going to feel less than. Naturally, this is the absolute nature of our ability to have choice in the freest sense.
Yeah.
So if love is absolute, this love has given us the freedom to do whatever we want, despite the alarming consequences that we think are so horrible. But it is our own maintenance of them, as though there's nothing we can do about them, that creates that horror. It isn't nature doing that. It's a choice we're making. And I've never seen a forest where the trees are arguing over what they're doing.
No.
Humans do that because we have the ability to think about our thinking, and then we have the ability to make believe what we think is reality. Those are all choices we have within the range of freedom. So we
Yeah.
take the greatest asset, creativity and imagination, and turn it into a major liability. And the
Yeah.
instincts gone awry, all of a sudden the fight becomes denial and defense. I'm not doing what I'm doing. That's not fighting an actual threat. That's fighting an imagined threat and then denying I'm the one causing it. And flight is running, escaping, compulsions, trying to make believe I can outrun it, because the instincts now have been completely turned upside down by making believe that my nature is unnatural and that my mistaken identity is my identity. And misunderstanding is my understanding. All of those things flip within the context of a lie, because a lie is trying to only be what it can't be.
I will say that was one of the most helpful parts about being in treatment is being with some of the most robust examples of like denial and self delusion, and in others,
Yes.
to to then be able to as recognize it, through the process of recognizing it in others, is to recognize it in ourselves. It doesn't come as easily to me sitting in meetings with people who've been sober for a long time as it did sitting around in a group of people who are so lost in this in
Yeah.
this in this darkness of uh, of self delusion, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A friend of mine texted me this morning that he went down to the Midnight Mission. We used to have a Sunday morning. The mental obsession meeting started at the Midnight Mission downtown,
Oh,
because I was talking to guys who'd never been exposed to sobriety about the mental condition, because I knew that it's probably the best point for them to begin to hear it, because I knew that they may fight the concept of being an alcoholic or a drug addict, but I knew that they related to the mental problems because they were in it.
yeah, they're
And
experiencing the mental illness, the insanity of it.
nobody said this is a high point in my life. I'm at the Midnight Mission.
Yeah.
Nobody, nobody, including the guys that got on the street for years. They were finally coming to terms with the fact that they'd found a bottom because they decided to stop digging. How long
Yeah.
that not digging lasts is up to the individual. But what was interesting is that, well, some of the concepts were difficult for them to grasp. You could see that they were considering things they'd never thought of, or if they
Yeah.
thought of them, they dismissed them. And nobody argued over the fact that they were struggling. In
Yeah.
my experience, where I get the arguments from often are the people who are the sober the longest, because
Yeah.
they've created a model of how it works for them, and they're going to stick to it, and their life depends on it, they think. But they're actually just creating a new limited version of what's possible by thinking of things in relative terms and thinking of them ritualistically and thinking of them as a repetition of something that I do every day, and every day I have to do this or I'm at risk. And that's not what the book says. Doesn't say that meetings are the answer or the solution. And it doesn't say that meetings are wrong. And I'm not suggesting that they are. But the
Yeah.
idea that they become something necessary is a new intoxication with another ritual, another way of doing it. And people in that, I work with a lot of people with a lot of sobriety that struggle.
Yeah.
And it's offensive to them that I would suggest to them that they may be doing the exact same thing they did when they drank in their thinking presently.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about that a lot. I mean, in terms of, I mean, all, AA is a human institution built on timeless principles of a power greater than ourselves,
Hmm.
but it is a human institution, and it and it's quite interesting that in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's the genius of it is that it is so broad that people can sort of find their own way into the spiritual solution. But at the same time, it's kind of, it can be sort of baffling sometimes when you're newer, to be in a room full of people who are all doing it a little differently. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, the people that are, and you can see from that perspective, sometimes the people who are most at peace are the people with the least sort of like uh that are the least convinced that that the way they're doing it is the right way.
Yes. Yeah. Well, in that regard, all thinking in any limited way, if things are absolute in reality, then all thinking is doubtful to some degree, all of it.
Hmm.
And the only thought that might not be is the idea that reality is reality and truth is truth and things are as they are. When you can begin to engulf everything in a single thought, you begin to see that stability is very easy to maintain if you're thinking of things accurately in the broadest sense rather than individually and separate and sort of in that seeming personal sense. And it's not to suggest that we shouldn't or can't do that. But
Hmm.
if we're doing that and struggling with this sense of uncertainty, it's absolutely coming from our thinking. It's not coming from an absolute source that doesn't change, because there would be no possibility of change in that absolute source. So there's not much to talk about in that department because there's not much to talk about in that department. It isn't a conflicted, complicated, long story of evolution and process and change and all that stuff. It isn't that at all. It is a non changing, absolute state of being awareness. And if we know that, it isn't because we think we know it, it's because we know it. And when we begin to think we know it, we begin to align thinking with it rather than think of us as depleted because we don't know it and think then thinking is the ruler of the universe by imagining that something we don't know because we've concluded in thinking, which we've already established. We can think we're not even thinking what we're thinking.
Yeah.
If we can do that, certainly we can conclude that we understand reality and reality is only what we think, when in fact it can't possibly be limited only to what we think, but something we absolutely know. And my sense is that's the transition between starting to see the thoughts as something we're doing rather than having the thoughts as something we are. It's this idea that we're in the bubble of our thoughts that has people say, I feel stuck in my head. I can't let go of my thoughts. They're happening to me effectively. We've created a model that gives us a justifiable excuse for not noticing that responsibility is a capital R and it's the nature
Hmm.
of existence. I am, we are responsible, period, for all of the everything that's going on. If we didn't exist, we would not be responsible for any of it. And I'm not talking about physical non existence, I'm talking about absolute non existence. And if we exist, we exist. And to
Right.
think we don't belong is a function of choice of thought, not of reality.
Yeah.
You can't think you don't belong if you don't belong. So it's
Yeah.
starting to see that the contradictions are so evident and they're so imposed by the thinking we do. It's not even the self, because at that point you realize thinking about thinking itself does not create us. It just creates more thoughts, which is why obsessive thoughts are constantly trying to turn a lie into truth.
Yeah.
That's all they're doing.
Yeah. And they can persist despite insight into the irrationality of those thoughts.
I
Yeah.
think to that point, Evan, that this idea that we have a subconscious and that it's beneath us is interesting,
Hmm.
because the word understand and substance also suggests something beneath us that is understandable and substantive. So think of
Yeah.
this. We've used this idea that we don't think we're thinking those things as a way to think the subconscious is something we don't know anything about, when in fact we talk about the subconscious openly as an excuse for what we're doing and then continue to act as though we don't know what we're doing. And
Right.
my sense is that primary motivator, like the fourth step, we're looking for motives and conditions. What are the things promoting these defective thoughts that we're doing, these immoral expressions that we're doing? And the fourth
Yeah.
step is a moral inventory because it's looking in the immorality of our thinking in relation to others, people, places, and things. That
Yeah.
includes all of it, not just some of it. We're really asked to look at it all and say, look at the landscape you're living in and notice what you've done with it. And what's the fourth column? Responsibility, absolute responsibility.
Yeah. That is interesting how humans use the sort of the subconscious, when you separate it and then it's easy to place responsibility on it for things that were basically what we wanted to do in the first place. I have a new friend who's new in the program, and he's like 90 days sober, and which is sober longer than me at this point. But he called his Coke dealer on Thanksgiving morning while he was making the turkey, and relapsed in front of his wife and his whole
To
family, who
wish
were
him a
just
happy Thanksgiving, right?
yeah, who were just all coming together for this reconciliation because he had been to treatment, right?
Yeah.
And and um and my instinct is he actually wanted out of that marriage, and and was and you know he I my instinct is he did actually want out of that marriage, and now he's out of it, and it's his subconscious that got him out of it. Where if there wasn't that separation, and he had the capacity through practice of this spiritual program to recognize honestly how he really felt about things, you know what I mean? There could have been a way to extricate himself from the marriage, and with much less pain all around,
So what you're talking about, think of the book. It says we will intuitively know. Intuition
Yeah.
is knowledge beyond reason. Think of that. Knowledge beyond reason means no reason, no logic, no thinking. Knowledge beyond
Yeah.
reason is intuition. We will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. What baffled
Hmm.
us? Thinking that thinking was reality, that
Yeah.
thinking was truth, that thinking was ourself, that thinking we even had a subconscious to use as an excuse. Listen to
Yeah.
people's excuses as to why they do what they do. And they really believe the excuse is the condition that caused them to do it rather than the condition they caused to justify the doing of what they did.
Yeah. It's like a separation in the mind that isn't really a separation.
Exactly. It's an attempt. And
Yeah.
here's what's interesting. Think about that point. People tend to feel disconnected. You hear it all the times in meetings. A lot.
Hmm.
I feel disconnected. I feel alone. I feel separate from. People talk about that all the time. That's not reality because there's a seamless, symmetrical, absolute synchronous, absolute state of being constantly present that we're all a part of. And we can't be a part of it as a small part. We're a part of all of it. We're each a part
Hmm.
of equally all of it. That's the difference between starting to look at things in absolute and infinite terms, is to say, oh, I'm not some small part of it like we talk about. We're just some small speck on a little planet. No, no, we're absolutely a part of all of it. And none of it is quantifiable in terms of size or space or time. None of it, because it isn't in time or space. It's a
Yeah.
dimension well beyond the one we think of subjectively and objectively as the only thing going on, because that's where our bodies live. That's where our bodies experience things from. That's where our senses are designed to sense from. Our eyes
Hmm.
see very, very little of the electromagnetic spectrum, but that electromagnetic spectrum runs the universe. It isn't
Yeah.
gone because we don't think about it. It is there while we're thinking about it or not thinking about it. Those are choices we make. So
Yeah.
that separation is literally not reality. It's coming from an idea in reality that wouldn't be possible if we weren't connected. It's just a thought.
Yeah.
To think of thoughts as reality, we begin to think that that is our reality. We're separate, we're disconnected. All those things are just effects saying to us, you're thinking something that has no basis in reality. So to think of it as your reality and your truth is to feel alone naturally because you're feeling the essence of that thought that you have that has no denominator. And you keep piling numbers up on the numerator and thinking someday it'll be enough to turn it into a real number. It won't. Can't.
Yeah. Yeah. No wonder it's baffling.
Well,
Because
it's interesting that we would create the It's like being in a play that's really abstract and incredibly illuminating, and not wanting to get off the stage at the end because you're afraid your life would end because of the great insight the play provided.
right.
That's what we're doing. We're actually acting as actors in roles that we think are who we are. We choose these roles, we dress those roles, we do everything we can to appear to be those roles. We talk the right way, we say the right things, we do all those things largely because those are roles that are simply chosen. They're not reality, they're not who we are. They're choices we make about our characterizations and our personalizations and our seeming personifications. They're just
Yeah.
choices we make. And if we can make the choice, how possible would it be to be the only choice? Choice by its nature always allows not to be chosen. Always.
Yeah.
So we lie about that and blame choice for the one thing it can't possibly be, which is the only thing. And that's the addiction right there.
Right
That,
there.
that idea that we have no other choice, it's the only thing we can do, life feels hopeless. There is
Yeah.
no existence is not absurd except to conflicted ideas about existence only.
Yeah. We cling to him. We
Well,
cling to him.
that's how they survive.
Yeah.
We obsess and obsess and obsess and think and think and think and think and think and think that if anybody challenges our thinking, they're risking our life, they're putting us at risk. And that what's interesting is since there's no real threat, generally threat is a violent action occurring to us, which is what instincts are really designed. It's a bear chasing us, a tiger, a person with a knife, a gun, whatever. We know to run, get away, fight, flight, fear, flight, fright, freeze. Think of freezing, stay still. In the
Yeah.
obsessive nature of instinct, freezing means denial. I'm not doing it. I don't have anything to do with it. I'm not even here. Don't even
Yeah.
accuse me of being here. Don't even mention that I may have something to do with it because I'm absolutely frozen numb. In reality, within the context of relative temporal space, things that are frozen, the molecular structure, as you know, slows down so much that it's barely even happening. So it's
Yeah.
almost trying to not exist. It's trying to say, I'm not even here. I'm not even happening. And one of the new additions to the list of instincts is fawn, people pleasing. And the book talks about this not as a high point for us.
No. No. It's a huge issue with me. It's a
Me too.
huge issue with me.
Me too.
Yeah.
And my sense is, and we'll get into this next time. I know that your time is running out, but enabling is one of the primary issues of allowing addiction to continue to happen in the help we think we're giving so that we can continue to support the idea that other people are sicker than we are so we can claim to be better than them. And that's a pretty sick concept.
You know what 9 step amend. So I have my list and I've begun amends, and I'm actually practicing all 12 steps in my life right now, but I have more 9 step amends to make. And you know the ones I'm dreading the most, Jack,
Hmm.
are the ones where not people I've stolen from, not people I've lied to, not people that there's some overt bad behavior. It's the people that I love who, through my actions, put in complete fear
Yeah,
because they care about me.
right.
You know,
You use
yeah,
that against them to claim that you were dominant.
I
Think of
guess,
how
yeah,
sick that is. We
pretty
know,
sick.
we sense that and think we can get an upper hand on it by using people's own concern and see them flail. And I did the exact same thing with my mother, who was just had 6 kids, never planning on it, was just constantly worried about the kids.
Yeah,
And I knew that. And as a teenager, I just worked that in her and my father. I mean, my father, I get to the point where
yeah,
he was in tears once when I was a teenager, and he was a captain in the Marine Corps. And I just
yeah,
worked him, trying to claim that persona, trying to claim that independence, trying to claim that seeming reality.
yeah,
So now
yeah.
I'll take it to a broader sense, and I think your time is running out.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, a couple more minutes. Then I got to go to the dentist.
If reality is absolute and life is then absolute, and existence is absolute, and responsibility is absolute. The real amends is to the fact that everything we've ever done in this addictive sense has helped encourage other people to do the same, all other people. And all of the actions they've taken in relation to all the things they took those actions, we're also responsible for. To begin to see the global nature of the impact is to begin to actually begin to assume responsibility so that the actions we take become thoughtful enough to be worthy and beneficial of that impact rather than continue to feed electricity into that reactive nature and think that somehow we're dominating people by causing them to get worse.
Yeah.
And that's carrying the message. That's the one that Bill was actually talking about because he didn't talk about it. He talked about it enough in absolute terms to suggest that he saw this, but the program he was working on was really dealing with a subjective objective reality or experience and introducing this other thing as something to grow into or to begin to realize we're already in. Most of the
Yeah.
steps were designed for initially people who'd never had a spiritual experience, people who were still drinking for the most part. These were people who were just coming off of the streets and into an environment where the possibility of not drinking was the only thing they were after. They
Yeah.
weren't after a life that was fulfilled. He saw that though, because when in his hospital bed, he saw that the message could be carried to people around the world, not some types of people, but all people.
All
In,
people.
in the delirium he was facing, he saw that potential. And there was no inequity in it, no discrimination. And when he talks
Yeah.
about practicing principles in all our affairs, that would mean everything we're doing is affecting everything. And starting to
Yeah.
see that and live with that and say, wow, this is not a small responsibility, this is a total responsibility. And it doesn't mean I can't go wrong and do things wrong and I have to be on my toes and walking that razor's edge. It means that if I'm learning anything, I'm learning to account for the mistakes I make and learning to right the wrongs I make. And I make enough of them every day to get lots of practice.
Yeah.
Love you, brother.
Love you, Jack. Thank you.
It's
Thanks as
good.
always.
Good. I'm glad you called. Let's continue.
All right. Thank you, Jack.
Bye.
Bye.